Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this December 9th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show, if you so choose, every Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. I hope you go back to my shows of Monday and Tuesday and listen to what I brought forth as far as the discussions between Phelps and Tupper Saucy when Saucy was alive back in 2002. And the reason I did it was to clarify some things, as well as talk about two of the more influential researchers regarding the New World Order, the Old World Order, the Jesuit involvement in it, as well as when it began and how it plays out today. So go back to those two shows, and I hope you enjoy them. Now, I promised yesterday, this is part 3 of the shows I've entitled The Origins of the New World Order, aka Old World Order. And the reason I'm doing it is that I had a number of emails saying, where does this all begin? I've got so many conflicting ideas. And you can learn a lot by just asking a simple question. Where did the New World Order begin? And before you do that, let's look at what people think when they hear those words. And let's start out with mainstream America. Okay, and maybe some of this is going to be redundant for those of you out there who have researched a bit deeper. But most people will say the word New World Order and then think about it as a conspiracy theory of people like, the people I mentioned just yesterday in my show, Phelps, Saucy, others who go deeper into this and say, yes, a New World Order is involved here, and what it is it wants to bring about the emergence of a totalitarian world government. And most people in America, and I would say the majority, and that's the way the powers that be like it, will think the common theme is a conspiracy theory about a new world order, is the secretive power elite, globalist agenda, conspiring to eventually rule the world through an authoritarian world government, which will replace sovereign nation states, and an all-encompassing propaganda whose ideology hails the establishment of the New World Order as the culmination of history's progress. Significant occurrences in politics and finance are speculated to be orchestrated by an unduly influential cabal that operates through many front organizations. Numerous historical and current events are seen as steps in an ongoing plot to achieve world domination through secret political gatherings and decision-making processes. Now, you can, on one hand, if you're in mainstream America, you're going to say that people that talk like this are conspiracy nuts. Then on the other hand, if you've researched a bit, you'll find that a lot of these words have meaning, and it takes a lot to go back and figure out how it all began. Where did it start? And I find it interesting that in the secular world, it's kind of they don't go farther than their nose to figure this out. And what I'm getting at is let's look at what certain people have said about the New World Order and when it began. Now, I find it interesting that, like I said, this term can be dated back when. And in the secular world, some people say it goes back to what? 1940. Okay, that's when it began? Now, how did it begin in 1940? Where did it start? They start saying, it started with certain things before World War II with Hitler. It started with Stalin. It started all during these periods of time. And I'm trying to figure out if that's true. Now, I don't think so, but many people out there will say the New World Order phrase can be traced back as far as 1940. So most people will say that the New World Order started, this term and what it is started right back then when H.G. Wells used it as the title of a book about a socialist unified one world government. The phrase has been linked to American presidents, going farther back, Woodrow Wilson, whose work on establishing the League of Nations pioneered the concept of international government bodies, and to the first President Bush, who used it in 1989's speech. And I remember what he said. He said something like, "A new partnership of nations has begun. We stand today at a unique and extraordinary moment," said Bush before a joint session of Congress. "And out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. A new era in which the nations of the world, east and west, north and south, can prosper and live in harmony." This phrase causes alarm for many Americans, particularly those concerned with the international governing body trumping U.S. sovereignty. And the idea of this word New World Order basically can be traced back to there. But is that exactly what it is? Well, is it an extension of something deeper? And that's the question that we'll pose today. For those of you who want to begin the New World Order in 1940, 1950, 1960, 1920, okay. But I think there's a lot more to it. And let's look at some chronology here to give you an idea where we're at. Now, in 1912, a close advisor to Woodrow Wilson published Philip Drew, Administrator, in which he promotes socialism as dreamed by Karl Marx. 1913, the Federal Reserve is created, planned at a secret meeting 1910 on Jekyll Island. Georgia, by a group of bankers and politicians, including Colonel House, the guy I just mentioned. This transformed our financial system. Yes, it did. Transformed it. And I said many times, we need to be on the gold standard if this world is going to be anything fair at all, but it's not going to be. This transferred the power to create money from American government to a private group of bankers. So the Federal Reserve is a word they use to make most people think it's something to do with our government. It has nothing. It's probably the largest generator of debt in the world. 1919, prominent British and American personalities established the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England and the Institute of International Affairs in the U.S. at a meeting arranged by Colonel House. The United States seems to be involved in this somehow. And when we look at 1919, we're going back almost 100 years. And a lot of these things, that's a long time for people. Now in 1922, especially in America, when we think of history, we think of the Beatles. That's a long time ago, isn't it? But let me tell you, when you start really thinking about where the New World Order began, that's going to take us into a different era at all, a whole different idea. And where do you go to get it? That's going to be an interesting one too. We discussed it many times in this show, but it goes in one ear and out the other, most people. But in 22, December 15th, which is only a few days away, the CFR endorses world government in its first magazine on foreign affairs. Author Philip Kerr stated this: "Obviously, there's going to be no peace or prosperity for mankind as long as the earth remains divided into 50 or 60 independent states until some kind of international system is created. The real problem today is that of the world government." 1928, The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution by H.G. Wells is published. A former Fabian socialist, Wells writes, "The political world of the open conspiracy must weaken, efface, incorporate, and supersede existing governments. The open conspiracy is the natural inheritor of socialist and communist enthusiasms. It may be in control of Moscow before it is in control of New York. The character of the open conspiracy will now be plainly displayed. It will be a world religion." So here now, we hear these words in 1928, that religion and government are really working together. But where did this all begin? Did it happen in 1928? Did it happen in 1850? Let's think more. Now, in 1931, students at the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow are taught, quote, "One day we shall start to spread the most theatrical peace movement in the world has ever seen. The capitalist countries, stupid and decadent, will fall into the trap offered by the possibility of making new friends. One day will come in 30 years or so. The bourgeoisie must be lulled into a false sense of security." In 1931, also in a speech to the Institute of Study of International Affairs at Copenhagen, historian Arnold Toyi said, "We are at the present working discreetly with all our might to wrest this mysterious force called sovereignty out of the clutches of the local nations of the world. All the time we are denying with our lips what we are doing with our hands." Oh, then in 32 new books are published urging world order by William Foster, head of the Communist Party, a book called Towards Soviet America. Then we see this other book called The New World Order by F.S. Marvin, describing the League of Nations as the first attempt at a new world order. Marvin says nationally must rank below the claims of mankind as a whole. Now, what we're seeing here, if you think you're a great historian and a historical buff, this is relatively new stuff. This is something that's, where do these people get these ideas, is my question. Is it just basically all of a sudden these intellectuals come up and go, let's start a new world order? So if you're looking at all these things, all of these little tidbits I'm giving you is the tip of the iceberg of where this began. And think of it as an iceberg. You don't see, if you really understand icebergs, most of it lies under the sea that you can't see. And so that's my thinking when it comes to the New World Order, which I call the Old World Order. Oh, there are slight differences, but it had to come from somewhere. So how far back do you really have to go? Well, I'm moving forward, showing you from a certain particular date affecting our country greatly. There was a number of people who understood where this come from, who actually were in the same bloodline of many of these leaders that came hundreds of years before. And you've read those, when most people will say, oh, these conspiracy nuts, they're doing doing all these genealogies, and look at where the Bush family came from, England, and then they go back. But there is a connection to these families, and they want to keep their power. But how far back do these families go, and what line do they follow? And where is the dividing line between people who choose to join or be a part of the New World Order at high levels, or the Old World Order, and those that are separated from it? My question is, you never hear about the real heroes who understand who these people are, where they came from, and why they chose not to be a part of it. Those are the real heroes, but you never hear them, because guess what? It's the conquered that never have a word. And the conquerors write history. So that's all you really hear, is these people that are creating this system that we see today. Now, for example, let's look at something pertinent today. Would you in America say that there is a movement to take away guns, take away our Second Amendment rights to protect ourselves? The answer would have to be yes. And that I could ask anybody who, maybe people that don't even, that would say, Greg, you're a conspiracy theorist. They would say yes. Obama's been behind that. Presidents recently have been behind all that. Now, if you look into history, you'll see that Stalin did the same thing in Russia and killed over, 40 million. The same thing happened in China. And the same thing happened in, 40 to 50 million people killed under Mao Zedong, right? And then you have the same thing, and all of these two preach the same thing. Take away the weapons from the people because you are dangerous and we need to protect you. But they hadn't, then we went to Hitler, and he did the same thing in Germany. And now they're doing the same thing here, and it is not for your best interests. What you're seeing today is all these killings and shootings and this terrorist war on terrorism they've created, and in that you have all these lone wolf supposed terrorists now fomenting all these killings, and then that's a reason to take away the weapons. We have to take away weapons from people who can get them legally. That's what they say, and that's all these false flags indicate that. And that's what they publicize on the news. Now, when you see, I remember just recently in November, there was a shooting in New Orleans where over 300 people were involved at, I think it was Bunny Friend Park. And it wasn't even publicized. I mean, I didn't see it on CNN. They didn't do it like they did the Paris bombings. This was the recent one in San Bernardino, because it didn't fit their MO. And most likely it wasn't a false flag. It was a felon, a criminal who had a gun that shouldn't have. Those are the people that shouldn't have the guns. But those are the ones that will have them when yours are taken away. And that is why Stalin, Mao Zedong, Hitler, Obama, Bush, the rest of them, Clinton, are all working together. Now, our system may sound a little different, but in the end, the one world order, which was the old world order, works in the same way. Just different tactics now, just different names, different governments, communism, socialism, democracy, fascism. And in the end, they're going to mesh all these things together in the easiest form of government. You can call it what you want. Goofy's government. And the easiest way to control is to unite under this guise that we are protecting you. But where did this idea first begin? This idea of governments, this idea of religion and governments working together. As we go back in time, which is the smart thing to do, there's a lot of things along the path going back to. We're going to go back to Rome. Some people say, well, it must have started with Rome, because that's when the Vatican got together with the secular powers and began to work together. And in fact, priests were in charge of most things in old Rome. Well, in the Roman Empire. But it fell. Did it really? Well, maybe publicly it fell, and maybe in terms of, you can look at battles and things like that, but it's carried on. But is that good enough? We've done shows on the exact beginnings of the Vatican, the exact beginnings of the Roman Empire. We've done shows showing that the idea that what the Vatican tells you as far as Peter being the first pope is not true. And at that particular juncture, you have to start saying to yourself, if I could only get into those Vatican archives, and I've said that to some people here in America, they don't even know what the Vatican archives are. They think the Vatican, they've been displayed here as these crazy guys with hats on that believe in Jesus Christ and are, want to help you, have charity organizations, schools, etc. That's about all. And they think they're a very weak religious organization, but it's not true. And people are beginning to wake up when they see the Pope talking to our Congress, etc., etc. So my recommendation when we're searching for the origins of this are a lot of the things I'm saying here. We can go back from 2015 to 1915 to 1815 to 1715 to 1615, 15. All of these are tidbits that are progression from something deeper. Something that started earlier, that's been carried on through different organizations that have the knowledge, i.e. the books that were taken from Constantinople that are hiding in the Vatican archives, all these records down there of history. The Vatican archives, folks, and I lived in Rome, are protected just like gold, or even more than Fort Knox. You try to get in there, and the church says they're a free organ. They say they're representatives of Christ on earth. They say the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth, and one of Christ's teachings was an open book, right? Well, how come you can't get in their library then? So there's a sign. What is going on here? And if you ever got in there and started reading the things, you might get an idea of where we're going. And I'm saying when we're going to go back now, the Protestant Reformation and all these things are all offshoots of something else. Because it has to be that way. And in the words of these people, you hear it. And when you start digging into who they are and how Freemasonry, how the Vatican, the Jesuit order, and all these secret societies are the keepers of these signs and symbols and dating way back, they sometimes tell you where they began. And that's the interesting thing. So, going back step by step, you see that all of these things and the people in power all come from the same place in a sense. They all are connected. Now, many of the top families have bloodlines that go way back, and they seem to want to keep that power in their hands. And how do they do it? One, by reconstructing history like they've done, so that we don't get a clear picture. That's why many Americans, even many Europeans, Europeans are they've been around a little longer. But many Americans have no idea of this, and when they're just fine in saying either the New World Order is bad or it's good, and it started, let Hitler, or whatever. And then they don't like what their Obama's doing, so they think they can change it and get another guy in there. And it's not going to change. You have no idea what this is all about, and it is not. It is not something to be dealt with lightly. You have to research it yourself. And like I said, there's a whole million truths in this world, because every time you put your little head on the pillow, that's your truth at night. But when you wake up, one thing you should start doing is looking deeper, because this whole idea, these little signs and symbols they've given out throughout the course of history, are the key to going back farther. Going back way, way farther. And the farther you go back, folks, you can learn this from being an investigator in crime scenes. The information you're going to get about something that occurred is going to happen, in the first 24 hours. And that's the best time to get any information on a crime. So the farther you go back, the harder it is to prove something. But thank God these organizations like the Freemasonry, the Vatican, and others, and all these secret societies. We can talk about the writers, and Albert Pike, who has a statue in Washington, and Manly P. Hall. They leave us signs and symbols, and so if we watch what they do, can figure it out, because they know. They're the ones in control of the history that we should be reading. They give us a whitewashed version so they can keep us under their thumb. Sounds simple, but it takes a while to go back. And we're going to go back in the next half hour to really take you back to where it may began, the New World Order or the Old World Order. So we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And I hope you're enjoying this journey back to the origins of the New World Order, aka Old World Order. And I have left off stating that maybe we should start in Rome back during the time of the Roman Empire. Now, we've discussed certain things that went on many, many shows involving the Vatican, their origins, the signs and symbols of pagan governments, signs and symbols that still exist today in England, here, all over. We've done that, so I'm not going to spend time on that today. And you can trace those signs and symbols, and much of it has to do with the connection between the Vatican governments, Freemasonry, the secret societies. But I think other people have told me that it goes back farther. And many people, I asked somebody yesterday, a devout Christian, they said, well, it began with Nimrod. And I said, do you realize that 90% of Americans will have no idea who he is and may think he's some kind of Disney character? But if you look back at the Bible, and many people say that you should read that book to understand where the New World Order came from. And whether you believe in the Bible or not, I think you can get historical record out of it that verifies that statement. But when you look at, did it begin with Nimrod and the Tower of Babel? And the Bible tells us that Nimrod was incredibly ambitious. Starting with Genesis 10:10, we learn that the beginning of the kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Cana, and all these names I can't really pronounce. These are the cities he started, and Babel was the centerpiece of his government. But that wasn't all Nimrod wanted. He listened to it from patriarchs and prophets. It's a book wrote about this. It said, these Babel builders determined to keep their community united in one body and to found a monarchy that should eventually embrace the whole earth. So are the people that are governing today, do they understand Nimrod? I think they do. Are they correcting another Tower of Babel? Maybe they're doing that in different technological ways. So is it just Nimrod? Was he the beginning? But remember, they said Nimrod was building this whole thing to embrace the whole earth. That seems they're saying the same thing today, just in different ways. These rebellious people were planning to take over the whole world in defiance of God. Moses tells us in verse 11 and 12 that out of that land went forth Assur and builded Nineveh, and the city of Rehoboth, and Kala, and Rezin, and between Nineveh and Kala, the same is the great city, Babel. So now you know where the large city came from, okay? So you're looking at this, and read about Nimrod. So many people said maybe it was Nimrod because he was the founder of all these rebellious tribes after the flood, and his intention was to establish global power that will control all city-states in revolution against the government of heaven. This means that he was also the founder of paganism. That's what some people say. This is incredible, but it is also prophetic. Don't forget that the end times there will arise a new world order, a global empire called Babylon with a pagan religion. Its centerpiece is that great city mentioned in Revelation 14:8, known as the papacy or the Vatican today, the Holy See, as the Vatican is known among the nations of the world, is trying to make a name. As ambitious as Nimrod, the Vatican is working hard to elevate herself to become the moral guide of the world. Isn't that true? Look at what just happened with the Pope, so that she can sit a queen, as it says in Revelations 18:17. Nimrod was the founder and king of Babel. Perhaps Nimrod could see that by keeping everyone in big cities, he could then control them. He could control their economies, control their politics, and control their religion. He was determined to do what he could do to gain power, prestige, and notoriety. By concentrating people in cities, he knew that he could thereby gain much economic and political advantage. Babel's glory would command the admiration and homage of the world and render the founders famous. That magnificent tower, reaching to the heavens, was intended to stand as a monument of the power and wisdom of its human builders, perpetuating their fame forever. But notice this, that their new world order revolved around large cities that would keep the people concentrated inside them and would consolidate wealth and power into their hands of few. Sounds like today, doesn't it? Exactly what it sounds like today. But if we're going back to Nimrod, do these families have a connection? Do they understand where this government began, how it began, and do they want to be a part of it? There is a bloodline, I think, that will move along the centuries that seem to stay in power all the time. Interesting. And then, of course, they have their underlings that work for them, and life goes on. And then, of course, you have a few people who side with another way of life. And these are the ones that you never hear about in history. Or if you do, you hear about their heads being cut off. But wasn't this maybe the first attempt at globalism, some say? And like every attempt to New World Order since, it would also lead to a global religion that would defy the worship of the true God. I think something like that is happening today. There's no other purpose, ultimately, for the New World Order today than to oppose God and His laws. The principles of modern Babylon are basically the same. Do you think that today there are men like Nimrod who have similar ambitions? You think that in our time there are some who want to rule over their fellow man and concentrate populations in power in such a way so that they control the whole world like Nimrod wanted to do? Today, we can look at how these questions have one answer: a resounding yes. And I'm going to thank a resounding yes, and we're going to keep going, and I want to thank the words that I'm reading from Pastor Hal Meyer. I've never heard of him before, but that's what he had to say. And let me add a few things here. We see that I'm mentioning now, was this the first? Some people say this was where it all began. Okay? And let's look a little bit deeper at what Meyer was saying. He said, do you think men like Nimrod exist today? Now, let's look at it. And he says, yes. He's going to show you how these questions have one answer: yes. In fact, he says we're on the brink of the resurrection of Babel on a global scale. Our generation is marked by the same principles that were developed in ancient Babylon. And let me point out that Nebuchadnezzar attempted the same thing in ancient Babylon, a direct descendant of Babel, while Charlemagne attempted the same thing in medieval times. History repeats itself over and over again. And these men made a name for themselves and turned from God's law. Some of the men, so many people, look at it this way, folks. I want to add this. Why do you think people in America were turned, many Catholics were turned away from their religion and became atheists? Why do you think that the New Age movement began to turn people away from God and to look to a new light, so to speak? You know, when you do the foundations of the New Age movement, it began by a Jesuit priest, Father Pierre de Chardin, who was a mentor. Well, at least Hillary Clinton said that was one of her mentors. Now, why do you think they do that? Because they don't want you to go back into the Bible and understand really where they came from and why they're keeping this whole story moving forward to their goal, to usurp the power of God. Could that be a reason we can't say the word God in public schools anymore? And I might add, someone sent me a beautiful letter written by a very young 10-year-old, I believe, from Minnesota regarding the subject. I'm going to read it maybe Friday on my show. It's quite interesting. This little kid's view of why he can't say God or say prayers in school. It's interesting. Now, some of the men of the ancient Babel were atheists. Others were agnostics. A lot of those around here today. Like today, many of them denied the existence of God and attributed the flood to the operation of natural causes. So often when we read about disasters, they are explained on the basis of mere natural things. Earthquakes, described as a result of tectonic plates moving against each other deep under the surface of the ocean or the earth. While it is true, these scientists forget that God controls these things. Modern science takes God completely out of the picture, doesn't it? And only presents the facts of nature, as far as scientists understand them, forgetting that God is the author of nature and that his power is what sustains this earth. Tectonic plate cannot move a single millimeter without God's permission. Now, most people in America say, oh, that's foolish. You're thinking like the old people think. But you know, these guys that run your country think like the old people. They're just usurping and using the Bible as a cover. And they're doing basically maybe what Nimrod did. So their foolish hearts are darkened, and they cannot comprehend God's love and his hand in nature and history. And neither can people that do not get an opportunity to look at that view. And that's kind of what we're doing today. So I'm kind of saying, when you look at the New World Order and the Old World Order, can the Bible be a reference? And for those of you who don't believe in this, or read the Bible for other reasons, I'm going to show you tomorrow how it can benefit you, whether you believe in God or not. And maybe it can bring you closer to him, if that's what you're looking for. And because we're going to go back even farther than Nimrod tomorrow, and look at another view that I first heard in 1985 regarding the story of Cain and Abel, which is interesting because I'm telling you, when I bring that up to pastors, rabbis, they somehow, and in fact the Catholic view on the Cain, which I believe is another way you can begin looking where this New World Order began, with the story of Cain and Abel and what he did. I don't get that view. In fact, what the Vatican says about it is, oh, yes, one brother killed the other, and the city he built isn't really of importance, as most historians will tell us. I don't agree with that. We'll talk about going back farther tomorrow. So, we have this. Mr. Myers telling us that some people in Babel believed in the Supreme Being and that he was responsible for destroying the world in the flood, just like there are some today. Very few people do. Satan misrepresented him, so they saw him as a cruel tyrant. Now, here's an interesting thing. I sit with a lot of different Christian organizations, and I remember being in some Protestant churches in Colorado, South Dakota, etc., etc. And somehow they believe in God, but they say a lot of these things are not true. They're allegories. They're just myths created to make us believe, God's giving us messages. We didn't really do all these things. Well, think about that. Can you really believe in God if you think that way? I don't think so. So let's move forward, and you can chew on that for a while. But so there were people in Babel back then that they were responsible for restoring the world in flood. Now, another point here, why don't we hear more of this in our history classes, or why don't we hear more of this from our media in America? Because, you see, most of them work for this organization that wants to keep the information from you. And Americans are really basically a materialistic group of people that grow up in that kind of atmosphere that really, when you think of history, you think of 1965. That's as far back as you really want to go. Kennedy's killing, that's as far as I'm going. And that's really the mentality here. All of these things that I'm talking about are either, you're not going to find answers. I got so many critics that used to say to me, oh, he likes to spend his time living back in the Dark Ages. Well, let me tell you something. I think a lot of those people had a lot more on the ball than we do. So you can criticize all you want, but you're not going to find the answers to the problems you see in the world today unless you really understand what happened. Going back as far as Nimrod. Now, I'm saying some people think that's where the old world, new world order started. I think it goes back maybe a little. Well, I don't think so. I think that we should understand that it might go back even farther. And we'll get to that tomorrow, depending on the time frame here. When I get carried away here, I run out of time, usually. But we do have about 9 minutes. So let's listen to Mr. Meyer here talk about Babel. He said that there were some people who believed in God. Their hearts rose up in rebellion against him. These people did not want to believe God's word. They viewed him as a cruel tyrant. Therefore, they had to deny everything God had said, including the fact that he would not destroy the earth with another flood. He said that. They wanted security, especially security from God's vengeance, so they built a towering monstrosity. It is interesting to note that the more globalized nations become, the more concerned they are about their own security. Right now, global leaders are obsessed with the security of global financial system. They're obsessed with security against terrorists. But security was Nimrod's concern back in Babel too. He and his colleagues believed that another flood could threaten their lives. Now, from this book, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 119, we read, by carrying the structure to a much greater height than was reached by the waters of the flood, they thought to place themselves beyond all possibility of danger, and as they would be able to ascend to the region of the clouds. They hoped to ascertain the cause of the flood. The whole idea was to exalt the pride of human ingenuity and technology. They wanted to explain away the flood by finding a physical explanation for it. These so-called scientists wanted to turn their minds of future generations away from God and lead them into the worship of technology and science, which is a form of idolatry. And where better example is it than right here? Just those words I just said. Isn't that exactly what's going on? That would have been only a small step from paganism. They wanted a global idolatry. And that's what they're working for today, aren't they? The result would have been disastrous. Having turned from the law of God, there would be no restraint and lawlessness would reign. Without the restraint of the law of God, without justice, mercy, purity, and love, society would descend into oppression, violence, and brutality. Now, does the modern world have the distinction of repeating these things? Says Mr. Meyer. Modern cities, just like ancient Babel, he says, have become hotbeds of wickedness. Impurity, violence because of drugs, prostitution, homosexuality, corruption, bribery, and immorality in every kind. And let me say this. I subscribe to this, that it is the way it works. You have evil leaders that rule these evil people, and they follow their lead. And they can also instigate these things, allow these things to occur so that then they can then come down, put them in jail, and say, we have the solution. Because the more political leaders realize, the more evil, the more power they will get by saying they have an answer and we will protect the others. That's how they operate. And they did it back at the time of Babel. The men of Babel had determined to establish a government that should be independent of God. Had they gone on unchecked, they would have demoralized the world in its infancy. Their confederacy was founded in rebellion, a kingdom established for self-exaltation, but in which God was to have no rule of honor. Now, in my thinking, and I'm going one step farther here, Mr. Meyer, they use God and government and love of country as a front for what they really believe. And they want you to revolt so that they can turn against you, or they can double talk you and say, listen, you are fighting against us who are good, godly people. And you're fighting against patriotism, and you are the criminal. And that's why they want you to revolt. And the system that we're talking about in Babel was used prior to that. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, because those of you who think it began with Nimrod, let's look at maybe it beginning even earlier than Nimrod. And Nimrod carrying it forward, paying it forward. Let's use that paying it forward. These guys pay it. They're doing that all the time. They've done it from the time of the beginning of time, moving the system forward from one generation to another. And they can't do it without deception. And that's what we're trying to understand. And you'll see, and Meyer points it out quite well, that the same thing's going on today that went on then. But how many people go out today? And I always do this in the grocery store. That's why, when I go there, I put on sunglasses, change my appearance sometimes. They go, oh, here comes the guy with the questions. Well, I don't do that often. I mean, every now and then it'll come to me and go in and ask somebody, do you know what the Tower of Babel is? Do you know who Nimrod is? Hell, I said this. I said, kid in line, we're talking about governments, and I said, who was the first president in the United States who took us off the gold standard? They have no idea. I mean, they're not in there. I mean, people in this country, our educational system, basically, in one word, sucks, and it ain't going to get any better. And so you got to go out on your own and get this information. And as Mark Twain said, thank God I didn't let school stand in the way of my education. He had it right. And he has it right today. This educational system, to me, is a waste of time. Okay, you're going to get obedient workers out of it, people who believe that anything said like we're talking about here, even they don't want you to even look into the Bible as a reference book, let alone have a belief system of your own, besides them telling you what to believe in. So it's a crooked world from the beginning, and all we're trying to do is figure out where the heck it began. And I think it's naive to even think that it began in the Roman Empire, which is really, when I started doing that, people go, why are you wasting your time going back that far? It has no relevance today. And I say, you got to go back even farther, and it has even more relevance today when you start looking back farther and tracing it all the way through the Roman Empire and all through the different wars. And you can take subjects like war and figure out what's going on. I like doing that, taking that subject and saying, wow, there is something here that plays out throughout the course of history. A lot of them seem to be orchestrated. Wow, let's look into that. So, as Twain said, don't let schools stand in the way of education. Don't let these government people stand in the way of education. And don't let people, on the internet who are proposing all these things stand in the way of your education, including what I'm saying. I'm only saying this to inspire you to look at it yourself and say, hey, right or wrong or whatever, so that you have a better understanding of what we're living in today, so that you can live it, because I think you can lead a happy and healthy life despite these people. And I think that's what God tells us. And it's really difficult to figure that out today, because they don't want you to be a thinking human being that thinks on your own, that has your own system of beliefs that you created through deep research, through thinking, through laughing, through being with your fellow man. They don't want that. They want you to listen to them, their media, and they want you to follow them as obedient workers right to your grave. And let's just get this point out. From the time of Nimrod, and even going back to the time of Cain, which we'll do tomorrow, those people don't care about you. They lie to you, they deceive you, and their main goal is to keep their power, and everything they do is designed to do that. And also to keep their family lines going, keep the money in their pocket, and hell with you. That is the world you live in. We'll be back tomorrow with more, and maybe go even farther than Nimrod to figure out where this new world, old world order began. Have a good evening, and good night.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.